information in the chat.
Well, welcome to the September 23rd, 2022 Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council. We can continue complaining about how cold we are, or we can start talking about budget priorities. Okay. So there was one thing that I missed on the agenda that I would like to add at the beginning as we review that. So the minutes could be linked in there, and we will be primarily focusing on continuing our budget priorities discussion from our last meeting. We had some good feedback from the Vermont Climate Council, and there's kind of an overarching way that they'd like to see our budget priorities come to them. So we'll go through that. And then one thing that I'd like to add to the agenda that I forgot about was we had some discussion at the last meeting about asking Marion to join as a member. So I'd like to just start off our conversation that way. Unless anybody has any concerns about the minutes from the last week. Okay, so why don't we launch right into that? I had brought up that it'd be appropriate at this time, with the Climate Office becoming established and Marion's evolving role as the Climate Office becomes established, that we could ask her to be a full member instead of what she has been providing enormous amount of support to this committee, but I'd like to bring her on fully as a new member. I didn't have any folks say no, not at all, we can't have her. So if it's okay with folks, then we may just need a motion or something, or not. Yeah, you think so? Okay.
I think a motion would be good. Then we can forward that to the steering committee as official action.
So do I have a motion to welcome Marion, if you'll have us on as a member of the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee?
I would make that motion.
Alice Neal is going to move, and looks like Ann Lawless is going to second that. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. None opposed. All right, welcome, Marion. Do you want to make a speech?
Nope, happy to continue working with you all.
You can leave it to me to make it the most awkward, coming onto a committee possible. So, okay. So the meat of our meeting today, actually, what I wanted to remember, so there was some discussion at the Climate Council about public comments. Catherine has really set the bar on this. We typically ask folks to please, if you've taken the time to join us for our meeting, then we most certainly welcome you to speak up, even if you're not a member of the committee or staff support of the committee, and you're here as a member of the public and an interested party. We do welcome you to provide your input at whatever time. We just ask that if we don't know you, to introduce yourself and as a member of the board. So I just want to set that right up front. We'll continue to remind folks, but I think that's a great rule. Catherine set that a while ago, and it's really really done well for us.
Yes, thank you for saying that, Erica. So I'm trying to figure out if we even have any members of the public here today, but we treat input from members of the public and official committee members equally. So if you have a thought or an idea or question and you want to jump in, the only time differentiation really matters is when we have to vote. But otherwise, we don't have just a certain time set aside at the end or the beginning for public comment.
Can I ask a question? If
Please do.
someone asks a question in public comment, is it our policy to answer them? Or, I mean, I've been on some,
Yeah, we just generally have a conversation here. Keep it really
Okay.
informal.
okay,
Yep. And if it's something that's unresolved, then we will work to resolve it and go get the information.
okay.
Yeah, it's different than if you participated in like a DRB or a zoning board sort of situation at the.
Okay, so let's dive right into our budget priorities discussion. So we had a great discussion at the last meeting around some ideas that we might want to forward to the Climate Council to include in their recommendations to the legislature for the FY24 year. I sent before this meeting, I sent out kind of a list of those, as well as some additional input we received from within and outside of the subcommittee for your consideration. And I think what I'd like to do is to start off by just refreshing our memory about those ideas, and then asking if there are any other ideas that folks have. Then Catherine has taken a grid that the Just Transition Subcommittee utilized to make their budget proposal to the Climate Council, and to input that information onto there. And I think that really will aid our discussion. We really do need to work on prioritization, meaning we may only be able to afford, the top one or two ideas that we as a committee feel strongest about. Noting that we had some other ideas, but we may only need to or be able to do that. Otherwise, I think that the rest of that they all get diluted in the mix of all of the ideas. So if we need to, and we have a hard time later kind of coming to consensus around what our top ideas that we want to forward onto the council are, I can set up a Microsoft form, and we can do some voting offline if we want to.
You can't do that.
Okay, we'll figure something out. I was like, oh, how can I use some technology to like
I
make
know, it'd be so fun.
Okay, well,
I will note, before we jump into the discussion of the details, it's quite clear that a theme around the ideas that we had and that we heard from others were the need for assistance for municipalities, whether that's technical assistance to get things done or money to build things. That was the missing piece that hasn't seemed to be picked up by anybody besides the fuel switching bill that was included in last year's legislature that's kind of held up due to ARPA eligibility. So that definitely was a theme.
So, so just to refresh our memory on some of the ideas that were put forth, the number one item that folks were, the first item that folks were talking about specifically was around grant funding to specifically address the vulnerabilities that are highlighted in the Municipal Vulnerability Index results that we anticipate that we'll get in the springtime next year. And so that was part of what we spoke to with the Climate Council, taking the results of the MBI and creating a grant program that will allow municipalities to address some of the shortfalls that are outlined in the MBI.
And it should be noted that the Climate Office in its budget has included some funds for outreach around the Municipal Vulnerability Index to help explain it and do general awareness about it, but no funds for actually trying to address some of the vulnerabilities that were addressed.
Catherine, do you want to speak to the areas that you spoke to with the Climate Council?
Sure.
It was around the funding for the RPCs to provide. I think it's in the first line there, but I don't want to. I don't do them justice when you do.
Well, I think you do. But one of the goals in the climate plan was to establish technical assistance funding for the municipalities to address resilience and impacts of climate change. And included in that were increasing funding to the RPCs to support the climate and energy planning, and doing a permanent state fund for design and implementation of local projects, and providing technical assistance to municipalities on flood and erosion risks. And then there's this kind of outside piece, which is to look at a state level individual assistance program to finance uninsured or underinsured households in disasters that aren't federally declared. So that's kind of outside of the municipal bucket, but was included under that goal. But you can see the first several items there are really related to assistance for municipalities, whether it's technical assistance to get the work done, who's going to manage the contractors, who's going to figure out what happens next, or actual funding to do the projects.
So I think that captures the rest of them, right, Catherine?
Mm-hmm.
You had just broken them up.
Yeah.
In those categories. Are there any other thoughts and ideas on those? And then are there any other suggestions that folks have that are just, that you feel to be at least added to this list for discussion? Anne?
Thanks. I agree with all of these, and just a little, one of the reasons behind it, and Catherine knows this as well as anyone, but probably for the last 5 years now, the Department's Public Service has been working to support the regional planning commissions and doing their enhanced energy plans under Act 174. And then there was additional funding that came kind of on a, that was sort of a one-time deal. And then there was some technical assistance funding for the RPCs to help their municipalities come up with their own enhanced energy plans and to do some training and technical assistance. And that's only partially rolled out, and the funding has come in fits and starts. And I think most recently with some of the funding attached to the community resilience program, that, the RPCs kind of help out with that. And there's a real need. We've heard it from the municipalities. We've heard it directly from them and via the RPCs that there needs to be just some longevity and durability to that funding. Not that it has to be a huge amount of funding, I guess, and the RPCs could speak to that, but just knowing that, you have a 10-year runway to help the municipalities do their planning and also then the implementation. And then you can get the staff, in who isn't coming in and out, and they know they'll be there for a while, and they can form those relationships. It reminds me of the work going on in the Upper Valley, where a bunch of towns have pooled to hire an interregional municipal energy coordinator, and that seems to be working out really well. So knowing that that person could be there for a decade or something would be, I think, really helpful to get this work, the ball going on this work, and not have new people coming in and learning the ropes every time when there's funding available. So I guess my only question is whether there's enough words here to kind of cover the scope of everything the regions would do in terms of the planning. I think I see reflected here. And then the implementation and technical assistance, if it may just be a couple additional words added where that says just municipality in one of these rows, municipalities add the regions. So the regions are capable of doing that whole scope of work for the municipalities, from planning to technical assistance to implementation. That'd be my only suggestion. I'd be happy to send some language.
Great.
And we may ask that you summarize those pieces, because I got Ann Margola's energy plan written down. So thank you. Alice?
I'm looking at the third one under what? Provide technical assistance to municipalities to assess the flood and erosion risks facing drinking water and wastewater systems. Waitsfield is right in the middle of this. And I think this is important to look at based on especially some of the river corridor program regulations that are going to be coming into effect or are in effect. That would certainly be a component of new bylaws in the zoning bylaws for municipalities. But the other one that I want to talk about here is, as we do our wastewater study in Waitsfield, one of our big alarms is coming from the number of aging systems. And the real problem with systems that are either near their lifespan end or that are way past it anyhow. And failed septic systems we're concerned, and septic systems that are already having problems really affect groundwater and the purity of the Mad River, as groundwater could make its way to the river. We're discovering, and I think municipalities would be surprised, that we started out with a figure of about 1/3 of our systems are very aged, but looking at the numbers again, we're now at about 70% of aged systems in particular areas. So I would add that
Mhm. Right.
technical assistance to look at aging systems and what really needs replacement.
That's a great addition. I just added that in. And with this one, I was wondering, Marion, and maybe you can speak to this with the new climate office and your role in resilience and coordinating state agency efforts. Is this something that you are aware of is already happening or already planned? The sort of technical assistance to municipalities on not only their infrastructure, but their individual aging systems or vulnerable systems?
It's a good question, and I don't have a great answer yet, as we're still waiting to pull together that cross-agency group and sort of look at how the Climate Action Office can be that voice of coordination across technical assistance programs. I mean, I think specifically with the climate toolkit, the hope is that we can provide a better connection from municipalities to the folks at the state. So at DEC drinking water and wastewater programs that provide technical assistance. But in terms of resilience and adaptation goals, I'm not sure what level we're going to get to yet. So stay tuned. And I think a good thing to add in here to at least get the council to think about it from their end.
Great.
Ian?
Thank you. I just want to add to Alice's point. I know in my town, Wheelock, we have a small water district. It's called a fire district. It serves 20 households. It's not run by the municipality. And I think there are systems like this all over the place.
There are.
And
Yeah.
they are, it's really hard to get a handle on how to help, where you have a combination of aging infrastructure, an possibly ineffective board, sort of a governance structure of who manages this water district and how people are supposed to get involved, the technical issues in managing it. and mostly, I guess, the aging infrastructure. So I would want to be sure that those things can get included. And I think we're going to see an increasing number of problems with these small systems. I know Craftsbury, there's a system in Craftsbury that has PFAs, and they have to figure out how to deal with that. And again, I'm pretty certain it's not the municipality.
Correct. Yeah, they're independent
Right.
entities. I think there's, last count I saw put the number over 100
Ooh,
statewide.
so I don't know, what do we do to change the language? Do we just add those as an entity?
Yeah,
And
I did include Ben's suggestion of public and private.
Yep.
Water and wastewater systems.
Mm.
And then I included specifically aging septic as well. So I think that captures both. That's why you hear me typing. I'm adjusting as I get comments.
And I noticed Megan's got their hand up. I think since we're on this topic, we may want to try and flex this out a little bit more, since this is one of significant discussion, to at least say what we as a group would intend to be the outcome for this goal. Megan?
I was just going to also touch on the small communities like manufactured housing, mobile home parks, and making sure that they have access to that type of funding also through the TA providers, because they don't have the ability a lot of times to have, they don't have anyone to advocate for them. So.
Mhm.
Megan, are you talking about the funding that we are proposing under this line 3 on this
Yes.
grid, and including? Okay, thank you.
So if I reword that to say that provide technical assistance to municipalities and private system managers / owners. And then the rest
Yep.
of the stuff. I think that will incorporate it. Do we think it's worth calling out mobile home communities
Yes.
specifically?
Yes,
Yes, okay.
we have that here in Waitsfield also. But also, if you go to the DEC and A&R pages, you'll come across the funding for programs that they have specifically for mobile homes, private and municipal funding through the ARPA funding. And now is really the time to get people and towns to do this, because there is a lot of money goes through their clean water loan program, but it is fully funded monies to study and plan new systems. And then there's going to be a pool of money for the actual projects. So it's like, now's the time, the money is there.
So it sounds like that's, I mean, we've been talking kind of overlappingly about either providing technical assistance as well as funding to address issues. The goal itself says to provide technical assistance to municipalities to assess flood and erosion risk and identify potential mitigation improvements, but not funding. It does not specifically call out identifying funding for addressing those risks.
Okay.
This is something that, I mean, if this seems to be getting a lot of discussion, so we may want to make sure that this one really reflects the group's intent.
Okay.
Are we talking about funding for addressing the risks as well?
Addressing the what? I'm sorry.
Are we talking about funding for addressing the risks as well, or is it just for technical assistance and identifying mitigation measures that can be applied? It sounds like there's already funding available for clean water.
For projects, yes.
Water supply projects.
There's some, I think that there are definitely some eligibility challenges. I think, and sometimes it requires a system to fail before it's eligible rather than do a correction prior to failure. So I don't know enough about that, but I can try to look into it before we submit these. And certainly if that is the case, and we might want to suggest a tweak to that.
Mhm.
So in terms of what is needed for funding, I noted that, just typing while people were talking, that in addition to state assistance, state agency assistance, that there are other organizations such as a Rural Water Association that provide these technical assistance, and making sure that those organizations have what they need would be part of this. I see Alice nodding her head, and Anne, okay.
Never heard of it. Need to know.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, I don't know as much about it as I should, but they do help with the fire districts and some local well stuff, community wells. And
So do folks think that this goal should be one of the priority areas that we forward to the Climate Council, or is this, I just, this is getting a lot of discussion. So, we do want to come around to a consensus on whether this is kind of top of the tier or bottom of the tier for forwarding to them. A lot of good discussion around it, but I want to make sure that we're spending the time on the areas that we want to focus on for budget priorities.
And before you answer the question, let me just say, while we were talking, I've been able to combine our priorities into 3.
Oh, you're just making them bigger, but less.
Well, but not really. No, not really. Like, I really do think that it works. The first is the technical assistance for municipalities. The second is the fund for implementation of local and regional climate adaptation and resilience projects. And I just combine that with funding to address vulnerabilities that are highlighted in the Municipal Vulnerability Index, because they're, to me, the same thing, just one's a little more specific on the priorities. So if I do that, then this technical assistance for municipalities and private managers of water and wastewater systems would be a third priority. And then this individual assistance program, well, I think it's hugely important and worth highlighting. I don't know that it really falls under our committee.
That's what I was going to say, Catherine. I mean, it all needs to be funded, but looking at it from a climate threat, it's an environmental threat. But I'm just thinking climate adaptation.
I actually think that one, I mean, just being realistic, I think we will have more, the chances are higher that we'll be more successful proposing funding that is tied to work that is currently ongoing and is directly, is directed in the Global Warming Solutions Act. Then, this one, I don't know if it's the right venue to suggest that one at this time. The other thing is, I don't think we're at funding phase yet. I think we're at program development phase for that.
Well, I think I'm highlighting it one because I'm right in the middle of a wastewater project. The thing is that as I do this, it's like, oh, and this can affect the water quality, and this is really a groundwater issue. This is a wetlands issue, and the kinds of things that I'm citing here in terms of wetlands issue, flooding, exactly what's in this particular, the first iteration of looking at this. Yes, I think technical assistance is something that needs to happen to communities, because it's been a challenge even to very knowledgeable people, to having to educate them and finding out the what could happen if. And, you know, a lot of it has to do, it all has to do with the environment and the water. And if you're looking at clean water, clean rivers, and how that contributes to climate change, this is at ground zero. Like a municipality, a smaller one and a smaller one, might even say, what do you mean? Erosion and flooding. What could that do to our septic systems? So I think there's a big education and technical help component here. I know I've learned stuff and seen stuff that I never thought I would.
This is Ben. I just want to comment that a lot of the things we're talking about could easily fall under the rubric or heading of what we're currently calling the Flood Resilient Community Fund. I mean, we've essentially established a vehicle. It's a state vehicle, and we can do with it the things we choose to do. We could have a technical assistance component. We could even have a vulnerable individual component. We can steer elements of the Flood Resilient Community Fund, but it's there for using.
Is that ARPA funding? Or is that a permanent?
It is for
program?
now. For now,
Oh.
it's ARPA funded, but it needs to be there forever.
Agreed.
I'll just also add that the reason it's ARPA eligible is because it has a connection to water quality.
Yeah.
Bronwyn?
I think my hand was delayed. I had a question and I think Ben may have just answered it, but my question was essentially if that funding has limitations in terms of the kinds of vulnerabilities it can address, and if there's, you know, if every possible kind of vulnerability that a municipality might be facing that we might want to help them address has to somehow tie back to flooding, in which case there may be limitations in using that program as the vehicle.
Right, but once we're using funding other than ARPA funding, the fund could be broadened and rebranded. Because the water quality tie is linked to ARPA eligibility.
And I don't know if we need to get that into the detail for what we present. I know some formatting issues with what I was trying to put in the chat, so ignore my first one. I'm gonna paste the other two priorities. And then I have one more, just so that we can, I was gonna share my screen, but there's so much on there that I think it's easier to just look at it in the chat.
And Jay had a point earlier in the chat for that first line related to towns scoring high on the climate vulnerability index. We're talking about the municipal vulnerability index, right? Because I just want to make sure we could call it that. And scoring high, it may just, well, Jay, I don't want to speak for you. What was your suggestion around that wording?
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I think that index is an aggregator in itself, and it's not perfect. So just to make sure, using language perhaps that's informed by it, and Bronwyn had followed up on that, as opposed to rely upon entirely. just because it's going to be multiple hazards that aggregate that and multiple socioeconomic ways of measuring what is vulnerability looks like. So just to keep it general enough to not go too specific, and because I think it's more equitable too, because we don't know enough to rely on that one value, and it's more equitable to be inclusive. That's why I was thinking that.
Human intelligence counts too, Jay, is what you're saying, right?
The human needs to be in the loop, and if the human's not in the loop, then it's pretty dumb. Yes. Because we have a contractor that's going to develop that, and it's only as good as the inputs and the data sources that we have, which I think we all know are good but not great. So we still have to have some other interpretation of those hazards. And I think water isn't one. One other one we're not mentioning is wind. But in Mike Burke's world and the world that I work in power outages, wind is more important than water, for example. And I'm not trying to throw another fly in the ointment here, but just making that point.
Marianne?
I just had a broader point. I think this came up at the council meeting and Jane sent it out in the follow-up, but the funds that the council will be sort of developing this memo for are one-time funds. So as we think about prioritization and what to include, I think it's helpful to think about what's our top priority, thinking that understanding that these are one-time funds. And, how can we either use them to pilot programs or take specific steps on implementation that the Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee thinks is valuable to move forward other initiatives. But I think just keeping in mind that these are one-time funds, and there's been a lot of discussion of needing to build out programs for sustainable funding, but that's not what this specific funding is targeted towards.
So
I see that in the email, so sorry if I missed that.
Oh, it wasn't in the email? Okay. Well, I believe it came up in
that either,
but I can find yeah, so it's essentially the one-time funds from the underestimation of the state budget. So it's one-time funding is what this is kind of pulling from the pot for.
It's hard for me to read the doc and read the chat at the same time, but I'm just thinking, I'm not sure if this is adequately covered. I like what you're saying, Marion. If we have to focus on, I don't like it. I wish this was forever funds, but if we have to focus on funds that are limited, then it seems like an overall assessment for each municipality to help with their planning would be really valuable to help prioritize their needs. What is needed, what resources are out there, and what's the most important to focus on now, because a tiny town is not going to be able to do many projects at the same time. They just don't have the capacity.
Mm.
Okay, so are folks generally in favor of consolidating the grid that we have to the three main recommendations that Catherine has been talking about? One that relates to natural resource planning and providing the funding for more support at the local level to provide natural resource planning. One for
With Anne's caveat that if it has to be one time, it's that direct approach. I like that.
right.
Okay. Sorry, Erica.
Yep. And then one related to technical assistance to municipalities and private system managers and owners to assess flood and erosion risks on water and wastewater systems. And then the third being a funding source for municipalities to address, I hate to call them deficiencies, but address issues that have come up as a result of, in the results of the Municipal Vulnerability Index. So those are the three that are proposed right now, and to allow the individual assistance one to fall off for now, because it's not something we can really use one-time funding for. So those three. I'm getting stares.
Yeah, I like that. I like that the last one doesn't say where the funding has to go, but more directed at where the weakness is, right? So I see that as a pretty open topic, which is probably helpful.
Okay,
That's my thought.
thanks, Mike. Alice?
Yeah, I mentioned, I think that makes sense right now. Looking at flooding and erosion vulnerability with wastewater and water, given the river corridor project. And what municipalities technically are going to have to do to satisfy those regulations in their bylaws. The only concern I have is, and again, I said I'm right in the middle of it, but it really bothers me how understanding how aging systems
Mhm.
can contribute to water quality problems. And I mean, I understand, we're trying to be honing this and making sure it's targeted in what our mission is.
But I think you're right that the age, I did put the word aging, and maybe I need to make it a little
Yeah.
Stronger, because I do think, aging touches on resilience.
Yes,
High water will impact a new system differently than a 70-year-old system.
yes.
Yeah. Great. Oh, have fun with your meeting, Jay. Oh, did you already leave? So we haven't heard, there are people we haven't heard from. I see Bronwyn, you have your hand up, and then after that, if you want to jump in, Val or Andrea or David, Sue, Jens, Miriam, anybody who hasn't had a chance to jump in, if you have any thoughts you want to offer, go ahead, Bronwyn.
Well, what I'm about to ask hopefully will make everyone else feel very comfortable speaking up, because I think I'm about to ask a very dumb question, but I was having trouble following Catherine, the things that you had put in the chat, and then what Erica had just summarized. I'm a very visual person, so if there's a way to get whatever those final three are that we just summarized in writing somewhere, so that I can just check it out, because I think I wasn't following quite well there.
Yeah, I don't know that we'll be able to do it in the meeting here, unless Catherine works some magic, but definitely the intent would be to refine what those three are and send them back out to the committee. And we do have, I hate to say this, but we do have time if we need one more time before we send this in, or we can take comments on the version that we send out to the group. We have to fill in some more detail there, and we would want to probably do that next week and send it out to the group.
Yeah, and I can either today or first thing Monday work on cleaning this up as a result of your comments. But to summarize, if you ignore the chat where I was trying to put it in, I wasn't cutting and pasting very well. The three areas are technical assistance for municipalities on both planning and implementation. Number 2 would be assessing the vulnerability risks for water, wastewater systems. And number 3 would be a grant program to address vulnerabilities.
Catherine, listening to that list, it occurs to me that there is FEMA funding to do most, if not all of that. And what we may really need is match, particularly for small communities that don't have a match source.
Yeah, and for me, I don't know the specifics of what the language is gonna say, but in the chat, there's some like increased funding to RPCs and municipalities, and I just wonder about how specific we need to be about that, because more money doesn't necessarily solve a problem with capacity. So they might get more money, but they don't have the capacity to do much with it. Or is there like an accountability component to that? Maybe that's in the details and we talk about that later. That accountability could come into like money for implementation. If you do the planning, you get the implementation funds. But that's a lot of detail, so I don't know.
It's a lot easier to use federal and state grant money for capacity building if it's 100% money. Because then you can actually hire a new person and make the pie bigger.
Any other thoughts from folks that haven't been able to provide any, or if you have? But just want to make sure we're hearing from folks as we're building consensus around these three.
Yeah. Sorry, I had a cold. Can everyone hear me?
We can.
Okay, good. On a slightly different note, I'm wondering about if a big part of this is technical assistance, even if it's not going to individuals, if that's outside of our purview, but especially if this is going to go to private, not municipal water systems. I'm wondering about adding education to these initiatives alongside that technical assistance, just to maximize the sustainability of, because I know these are one-time funds. If we can do some education work alongside that to private providers of water systems or municipalities too, to keep these water systems more sustainable after these funds are spent. Not sure about that, but
It's a great suggestion. I'll add that.
Val?
Yeah, I'll pick up right where Miriam left off. I think the implementation, the TA for implementation is spot on. What's missing for me is the outreach and education piece. I think for smaller rural communities, if there could be funds to make them aware of, these are the federal funding, these are state opportunities that are available to you in these categories. These are the forms you need, the resources you need, like building capacity and templates to get them ready to apply for these opportunities are part of the piece too. I think most towns know they can go to their RPC to ask questions, get support, but if that information can be brought to them at their regular meetings, I think that might have more of an impact, and to tie it all together for them. Like why is addressing wastewater septic systems in villages, why is that a climate and resilience issue?
Great.
I think that ties back into the capacity at the RPCs too, and providing something there.
Yeah, I like that, the education piece to ensure the durability to a certain extent, but more so than just the one-time technical assistance. Those are great suggestions.
If I can just jump in, I think around the piece around educating and focusing particularly on municipalities identified as more vulnerable using the Municipal Vulnerability Index or tools such as the Municipal Vulnerability Index. I think last meeting we talked about also connecting that to how the climate toolkit can help fill some of those gaps. Again, climate toolkit's not going to be providing funds directly to municipalities, but at least making that connection, as Val said, to, okay, understanding why an aging wastewater system is important for your climate resilience, and here are some existing tools and resources out there. And I think to tie into that education piece, if we can make that connection in this budget proposal, I think will help draw those tools together and also help the long-term education coming out of the Climate Action Office. So at least helping to pull those one-time funds a little further.
Yeah.
Jens?
Sorry to be late to the party, but you know, using one-time funds for technical assistance is part of the problem, right? It took Jericho 6 years to go from inventory to overlay district. And so I just, so to whatever extent we can channel one-time funds into institutions like RPCs that might be able to use them, as Ben was pointing out, to build capacity with staff, I think is really important.
As their very nature, one-time funds don't really build capacity. They're a short-term fix.
Well,
you
it looks like
you
we've
can have
got
the capacity long enough to get a grant.
Right. To keep it going. That's what we're trying to do now with our current energy planner that we hired, energy and climate planner that we hired for 1 year. We're trying to use some of her time to try to find grants to keep her going beyond January.
Which I do think that's, you know, the council in discussion of these at their last meeting talked about using these funds for implementation, but also talked about them for continuing analysis that will help support components of the CAP and public engagement and outreach. I think partially understanding that the one-time funds, maybe implementation isn't always the best use of them, and that building education and doing technical analysis stuff that can help implementation down the road. So just looking at like what we have for the 3 items now are all focused on implementation, which is great, but there are those sort of other discussions that came up at the council meeting, acknowledging that these are one-time funds.
Well, to me, I mean, maybe some people don't see technical assistance and education as implementation of the climate plan, but I did because it was a recommendation as an action item in the plan. But not everyone would see that as implementation, but that's why I called it implementation. But we could certainly, it might be considered a different category by others. And you know, even though our instructions are one-time monies, I'm not sure that we necessarily need to ignore acknowledging the need for more than that. You know, that, and if this committee supports that, I think we should still submit that as a need identified by this committee. Municipalities in particular and individuals, as we know, are relied upon to implement most of this plan. And even the Joint Fiscal Office analysis made it clear that there's not going to be accomplished relying on voluntary actions without help and assistance. And so I don't think that we can ignore the need that municipalities and others have if we want to talk about how the plan is going to get implemented. Alice.
I really agree with that because I think 2 things need to be have direct local governments and residents to are the what do we need to do and how do we do this? Because what happens is a need will come up, okay? And right now, you know, we're looking at this wastewater project. So there's our need. The first thing everybody goes is how. And what happens is the town government and the residents immediately look at the town budget and go, oh my God. And that's where things die very easily. But if you can let each side know, the residents and the local government, that there are ways out there to fund what they need to do, it has more of a chance of getting done. I mean, when we're talking about this wastewater project in Waitsfield, we keep saying, what we're doing right now isn't costing the taxpayers anything. It's fully funded by these ARPA funds. And we really are hammering out, and that's how we sold it. The Planning Commission went and sold it to our excuse me, was that that hook. But if you don't get it, it's going to die right there at the taxes, and we don't have the money place.
So it sounds like we have consensus around these three areas. And what, like I said earlier, what we'll do is we can clean this up. Catherine, if you want to do the consolidation, and then maybe you and I can meet next week to look at filling out the rest of the grid. Then we can send it back out to the group for comment. Does that sound good?
And if we get, you know, feel free to be brutal in your comments. If we get enough back where there's enough disagreement and we feel we need to come together one more time before going before the council, then we'll do that. But otherwise, if you can just send us your edits and we can tweak it as we go.
Well, thank you all very much for it. It was a great discussion to get us there. And I think those are three very solid recommendations to send on to the Climate Council for inclusion. That was all we were here to discuss. Are there any, closing comments or any thoughts that folks want to leave us with today?
Did we do the minutes?
Early on.
Okay, sorry, missed it. Good.
I would like to point out something that you don't see every day, and Jay got off, but they just upgraded Fiona to a Category 4 storm, and it's way up in the North Atlantic, almost the same latitude as us. So things are different. You don't usually see a storm get upgraded to a Category 4 when it's off the coast in New England. So just a reminder. Thanks.
Do you folks have people going north?
That area of Canada has an incredible amount of crews. They've actually been hit by a hurricane, I think 2 years ago, and had 80% of their system down and didn't call on us. So I think we probably will not. There was also some requests for Puerto Rico, but for those that don't watch the weather like we do, there's also another hurricane that looks like it may be visiting us next Thursday, Friday, or maybe Friday, Saturday, Sunday next weekend. So we're sitting tight.
Yeah. We have some counterparts in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and PEI that we've already been in contact with, and they literally said they're battening down the hatches, but that's they don't often get hit with a major hurricane that far north.
Yeah, they are part of our mutual assistance group, believe it or not. We have a pretty close relationship with Nova Scotia Power, and they have already brought in a ton of resources, and they're prepped and ready to go. They just don't think they'll need to call on the US, that's all.
Wow.
Okay, well, thanks everybody. Enjoy
you
your
all.
weekend. Stay warm, do something fun.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.